Let's do it. All right, at 6 o'clock on February 22nd, 2023, I'll call the Planning Commission meeting to order. And I'll ask Commissioner Shisko to lead us in the flag salute, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And would you like to call the roll, Stacy?
Commissioner Flowers,
Present.
Commissioner Remick,
Present.
Commissioner Shimeniko,
Present.
Commissioner Shisko,
Present.
Vice Chair Price,
Present.
Chair Van Duzen.
Present.
You.
And the next item, please.
Approval for the minutes of February 2022.
Can I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Next item, please.
Public comment. Under Government Code Section 54954.3, members of the audience may address the commission on any agenda item within the jurisdiction of the commission or on any agenda item. Those wishing to speak on a non-agenda item will be called upon at the beginning of the meeting. Those wishing to speak against or for an agenda item will be called upon after the presentation by the City Planning Department and the applicant for that agenda item.
Are there any speakers for non-agenda items?
We have none.
Excellent. And the next item, please.
Regular calendar 5A, General Plan Annual Progress Report. State law requires all cities and counties submit to their legislative bodies the annual progress report on the status of the general plan and the progress of its implementation. The city's general plan contains 66 goals to guide overall city development as a basis for local government decision-making and to maintain the city's commitment to transparency, accountability. These goals and policies are analyzed and serve as a guiding action to achieve the overall vision of the community. Project Planner Eric Singer.
Thank you, Stacy, Chair, Commissioners. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight to hear our presentation on the General Plan Annual Progress Report. Because we have some new faces on the commission, we wanted to do a little bit of a primer on the general plan, its importance in the city's land use decisions and why we do things the way we do, essentially. And then the importance, ultimately, of what the annual progress report is showing to the state, how the city is progressing on those goals. So first and foremost, just looking at the general plan, as you all know, it's the Constitution, or we like to call it the toolbox for the city. All the tools that planners and any other department within the city use to progress towards the overlying goals within the general plan have to fit and conform with that plan, right? So we're talking the zoning code, the municipal code, specific plans. They all have to work in harmony to make sure that the city is working to achieve our overall goals. We, within the 66 goals that are outlined within the general plan, there are a number of more specific policies and actions that really drill down more specifically. And like I said, every single department within the city has a role to play in fulfilling those policies and actions. So if we want to zoom out just to the 10,000-foot view, every city and county in California has to have a general plan. It's our foundation for all of our local land use planning decisions. Usually on about a 20-year time horizon is how we're looking out. What do we want the city to look like in 20 years? What goals, policies, and actions are going to help us get there? There's 7 mandatory elements to every single general plan. So land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. Other elements, specific to different cities may have things like historic preservation if you've got a historic district that you're trying to maintain. A general plan can be amended 4 times per year. It's rare that it usually is. For example, last year we only amended it once. A lot of the time it's just to maintain, continuity with evolving state laws or regulations. Our first general plan was adopted in 2000. Since then, we've updated it in 2011, and again in 2021. That's the mandatory housing element updates that we have to do every 8 years. And every single general plan has to provide an annual progress report. So some examples of those goals and policies that we talked about. An overarching goal would be something like plan, design, construct, and manage a complete streets transportation network that accommodates the needs of all mobility types, users, and ability levels. And then within each of these goals, policies, and actions, there are specific departments that are pointed to as being responsible for making sure that that action happens. Community development, the police department, general services, et cetera. So specifically what planners, what we get really excited about is the housing element, because this is what we have to focus on every single year, making sure that we're achieving our progress towards what's the most important thing to report to the state, which is our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. It's a very popular acronym. You'll hear it all the time in planning circles. It's basically the way that the state monitors any progress that a city has made towards achieving its housing goals for the 8-year housing element period. So we just entered into a new one in the middle of 2021. The city was assigned 697 housing units that need to be built over the course of the 8-year period from 2021 to 2029. And this is our report card to the state every single year. We're telling them, yep, this year we built 162 units and we issued certificates of occupancy to 67, et cetera, down the line. Every single year, the state gets a little bit more nitpicky on, before I go too far down that road, do any of the commissioners have any questions just about the general plan, broadly speaking? Okay. Sorry, so who wants to know? Well, it's two departments in particular that we have to report to in the state. It's the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and the Department of Housing and Community Development. They want to know very specifically how many units are being built, how many housing applications are you receiving, how many are you approving. Every single year there are new reporting requirements that come up because over time the state has realized there needs to be some teeth to the way that HCD enforces its RHNA allocation. They want to make sure that a city is not throwing up roadblocks to housing development, so they're looking at, okay, how long is it taking from the time a housing entitlement is approved by the Planning Commission or the City Council to the time that building permits are being issued for that project. They're looking at now, in this last round, specifically how many lot splits are being approved pursuant to the Senate Bill 9 guidelines that allow for a lot split on pretty much any single-family residential property across the state. So it's getting pretty granular, and they really want to know, local governments, are you getting in the way of housing development, or are you doing everything that you can to aid in its development? So looking at the 2022 year, again, like I mentioned, the APR will highlight specific, goals that we've made in terms of building permits issued, housing improvement, or housing entitlements approved, et cetera. And in the 2022 year, we made quite a bit of progress, actually. There were 2 housing applications received, one for a mobile home community expansion for 16 additional units, and then another for the Sylvan Corners vacant parcel there on the corner of Auburn and Old Auburn. The developer is proposing 95 housing units, I believe 95. No applications were approved, essentially because they just didn't go in front of any hearing bodies in the 2022 calendar year. And then on the building permit side, we had 123 housing units that were issued permits, so that is to start construction. 32 of which were accessory dwelling units, which is very, very significant. It's one of the areas in which the city, when we were coming up with numbers for HCD in our last housing element update, and we were telling them this is where we see development occurring. A lot of it was happening, in already entitled sites like the Mitchell Farms housing development, like the Northridge Grove housing development, and then a significant chunk, about 100 units, we were pointing to accessory dwelling units as a way to meet that number. And HCD pushed back and said, well, how can you justify that this is going to occur? The state's been rolling out a lot of legislation that is encouraging of ADU development, but the great thing about Citrus Heights, we were always ahead of that curve. We were always loosening regulations ahead of when the state was telling us that we needed to. Part of that was that pre-approved, the permit-ready ADU program. And so now to say in 1 year, we've achieved a third of the housing units that we pointed to over an 8-year period in just 1 year. I mean, it's a great start, and I think it's indicative of the way a lot of development in entirely built-out communities is going to proceed, especially in California. So on top of that, 123 housing units that were issued permits, 62 housing units were issued certificates of occupancy or, finalled, quote unquote. Part of those numbers, so Mitchell Farms was a significant chunk, 68 building permits being issued and 54 certificates of occupancy. As if you drive by, you'll see that most of that development is pretty much complete. The Northridge Grove subdivision is, I believe, been issued their last certificates of occupancy, and all their site improvements are more or less done. That's also known as the 555 Mariposa development that had been in the works for a long time. I think it was entitled back in 2006 or 2007, so it was really nice to see that one finally come to fruition. The Wyatt Ranch subdivision off of Sunrise, that was issued 9 building permits to start construction of those single-family homes. And on the commercial end of things, the Sunrise Village Center there on the corner of Sunrise and Madison on the northwest corner has made pretty significant progress in terms of its renovation and remodel, getting some new tenants in there, making it a really attractive place for residents to come and shop. On the infrastructure side of things, like I said, it's a whole house effort. So, what we get back from General Services, giving us updates on things like the Arcade Cripple Creek Trail, being able to break ground. I mean, this is a huge, huge development that's been many, many years in the making. As you all know, it's a almost 3-mile long pedestrian multi-use trail that's going to cut through, major portions of Citrus Heights as well as unincorporated Orangevale. A big initiative that was launched this last year was our beautification crew. That essentially is intended to help clean up any significant blight that's developed over. Obviously, COVID didn't really help things, but providing cleanup and response in an expeditious manner anytime a citizen sees something that is to the detriment of the overall look and feel of the community. The Greenback Lane Complete Streets project, I believe, if we look at, much of that was completed this year, and it includes enhanced pedestrian and bike mobility, improved traffic flow, and improved rideability and aesthetics on the corridor. We do have Daniel Carrer here tonight. He can speak, if you have any specific questions on any of these infrastructure projects, he can kind of get into the weeds with you on that. And then just as an ongoing effort, we've been doing quite a bit of residential road repaving throughout the city. On the public safety side, we have Sergeant Semino here tonight that can speak to, again, if you have any specific questions about these programs. But our rental housing inspection program, since that's been launched in 2019, it's seen great success in helping to just continue to ensure public safety for renters and homeowners alike across the city. So in 2022 alone, they identified 583 housing units. They identified 3,341 total violations, of which over 2,000 were cleared. And then another significant development was the creation of the community prosecutor position through the city attorney's office. And if you have any questions about that, Sergeant Semino can answer those. So, long story short, try not to bore you too much, but this is our recommended motion, and like I said, myself or any of the other department representatives are happy to answer questions that you might have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It's great to see all of the different areas that the city is making progress on different things. And I have a question. we submit this to the state, do they ever give feedback? I mean, if there was something that was deficient, I'm sure that they would let us know, but do they just take it and that's it?
My experience with it thus far, and to be fair, I've only been reporting this to the state personally for about 4 years, but I will receive an email verifying that our numbers have been uploaded and thank you for submitting. I have not received any additional commentary or feedback. One of the important things to remember is that our ability to apply for grant funding is directly tied to us being current on our annual progress report. And like I said, HCD is being given more teeth every year to kind of follow up and make sure that what we say we're going to do, we're doing it. I think we saw that in this last housing element update where they were getting very granular and specific on, okay, well, you're saying that you have specific goals or policies or actions. How are you going to get there? What metrics can you point to? How many housing units were built over the last period? What policies have you put in place over the last 8 years that are helping you, create this many units over the next 8? I would not be surprised if in the coming years we start to get more maybe specific feedback as we continue to report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the commissioners?
I have a question on that rental housing inspection program. Is that something we do prior to individuals renting out their homes, or is that an inspection after people are in their homes? And what does it mean to be in violation during that inspection?
So I have unfortunately, a fairly limited understanding of the rental housing inspection program. It is implemented through our code enforcement department. I'm not sure, Sergeant Smino, if you can speak to any more details on it, but I mean, my understanding is that it is trying to identify whether it is prior to a renter coming in or if a renter is currently in place and they have something to report, any building code violations, any health safety issues that come up. And it's not so much code enforcement trying to be punitive and doing a gotcha type of thing. It's more of a, let's try to remedy these issues as they come up, and work with landlords, work with owners of these units to ensure that these things are being fixed before they do cause, God forbid, a fire or something more significant, so.
I don't know if it's the right person to ask. Regarding the ADU program that, we have permits that are pre-approved. I know a lot of people, they have their own ideas on what they want to do. If a homeowner wants to make any minor changes, are they able to, or is that going to be kind of like off the table then for them now if they want to make some changes to the pre-approved plans? How does that work?
My understanding is if they are superficial in nature, like the placement of a window or something that's not going to change something within the plan set that would need a significant revision, like a change to the layout of the plan, I think it can be accommodated. But Allison, I'm not sure if you wanted to speak any more in detail about that. Yeah, it's typically very superficial changes would be allowed. Anything more than that, they're happy, or we welcome applicants to take the plans, the limited plans that we have available online and say, okay, you can work with this as your basis, and then you can create another plan off of this as you will.
I have a question. I didn't hear you mention anything about the Outreach Navigator program, but it's included in the report. And is there some restriction or some legislation that we have to also follow in regards to this, and why would we report it? Just curious about that.
Well, I mean, there's no requirement or restriction necessarily. I will, to let you know how the sausage is made, essentially, I will put out an email at the beginning of every single year to all departments within the city and saying, please forward me any significant progress or any significant goals that you guys have achieved departmentally that you want to highlight, that you want to talk about. Because essentially, within the general plan, there are overarching goals that address things like, making sure that there's adequate housing provided and adequate services to those who do not have housing. you know, in terms of public safety. These are all things that are talked about within the general plan. So maybe some years they'll come up during the annual progress reporting, some years they won't. Sergeant Semino can speak in more detail about, you know, specific metrics or numbers within the Navigator program, but there's no requirement to talk about it. It's more within, so if you look at the very back of the annual progress report, that table that talks about each of the goals highlighted within the housing element in particular, a few of those will address things that are taken into account in the Navigator program. So it's always good to highlight when we have successes in that regard.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious as to whether or not there was anything similar to RENA, that we had a certain requirement or, you know, we were mandated to do a certain amount of, you know, the housing or thing like that. So, interesting. But I'm proud of this numbers. I really think we've done a great job, and hats off to the Navigator program. I think it's amazing. It's a true testament of what a city can do when there's intentionality. So,
Yeah.
good.
Are there any other questions? Tom?
Well, Commissioner Flowers sort of took part of my thunder, but I do also want to echo the compliments on the Navigator program. I was impressed with the numbers. I think it's always good to see some progress. This is one of, obviously, sort of an important issue in the community. So, I mean, I think the program is working. Obviously, other things are going on at various levels of government within the state to try to work on this issue. But you know, I think it's great that we can show internally within our community that progress has been made. Question on paving, obviously, another big issue. As I recall reading, correct me if I'm wrong, the metric for determining what streets get paved was tweaked a little bit. I think it was to basically maybe take into account also like a vehicle count per day or something. Am I correct? Such that if you counted, if you included not only just the condition of the pavement, but the number of vehicles, that you included the number of vehicles that were traveling in the road, and therefore the people impacted by that road, that it might change the metric as to what roads get paved.
Yeah, in a nutshell, you have the concept, we want to prioritize our arterial roadways and heavily traveled roadways first, as far as pavement conditions, and monitor those closer than our less used residential streets. But all streets are important, and we want to make sure we keep our PCI values as high as possible.
Yeah, I understand, but, you know, obviously if people are driving through neighborhoods, they can complain, but it's a limited number of cars relative to Dewey Drive or whatever else, you know, or San Juan or whatever else. We have a huge number of cars, and, you know, so. And I know
Exactly right.
funds are limited, I know. Got it, thank you.
Any other questions that commissioners have for staff? Okay, can I hear a motion?
I'll move to accept the 2022 General Plan Annual Progress Report and direct staff to forward the report to City Council and the appropriate state agencies in accordance with Government Code Section 65400.
I'll second that motion.
So the motion was made by Commissioner Flowers and seconded by Commissioner Price. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. And next item, please.
General correspondence, presentations, and reports from city staff. And Ally's going to give you some information on the vocabulary you have in front of you.
Good evening, Commission. Nice to see you tonight. Thanks, Eric. That was a great presentation, and really just want to focus on the collaboration that it takes to get that report complete and to achieve all the goals and the successes we have. It's a really great partnership that we have with the other departments to make that come to fruition. So I don't really have a training. I know it says training on the agenda, but I don't have a formal training. But I just want to point out to you that I did provide you a copy of a glossary handout, kind of just outlines some terms that are used in planning and some acronyms, especially for the new commissioners as you travel on to the upcoming institute. You might hear some of those in a presentation, and I don't want you to not be fulfilled with the information that they may say to understand what they're talking about. So that's just all I wanted to provide to you, and note that it's at your dais. So if you have anything comes up at the Institute, you hear a topic or you hear an acronym and you don't know what it is, please feel free to give us a call, shoot us an email, we'll add it to the list, and we might learn something too, because they always are changing and updating. So that's all that I have. If you have any questions on anything, happy to answer them.
Do any commissioners have any questions for staff? No questions?
Thank you.
Next item.
The adjournment.
All right. Then at 7:20, or 6:25, on Wednesday, February 22nd, I will close this meeting.